Right now, we're going to talk about what it looks like if you have a case in the court systems in New York. They were marginalized to a really small extent starting in mid-March with when everything went on pause. And right now, we're going to find out what is considered an essential matter, what is being seen and heard. And joining us now is Judge Ali, who's also a friend of the show. He's hosted shows. How are you?
Good, Victoria. How are you?
Good, good. So tell me, what is considered an essential matter? What is being heard in front of judges?
Right. First, it is great to be back on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. MNN has a very special place in my heart for the work you do and for the information you disseminate, like the question you're asking me. Our court system is one of our three dynamic branches of government, with the executive and legislative branches that we see are doing very good, hard work every day dealing with this pandemic, but so is our court system. You know, I tell people that there's no playbook for a pandemic. The last time we saw one is at the beginning of the 1900s with the Spanish flu. So it's not like a snowstorm that closes the court system for a day or two. Like, this is a wide sweeping change to our usual business practice. And I believe that our chief judge, Judge DeFiore, Jen DeFiore, chief administrative judge, Larry Marks, George Silver, Edwina Mendelson, they've done a wonderful job. And in New York City, our chief civil court judge, Anthony Canatero. In charge of family court is Jeanette Ruiz, and criminal court, Tomiko Amaker. These judges put their heads together to figure out how to keep the court system running while keeping people safe. And everyone's done their part: court officers, clerks, reporters, interpreters, attorneys. So what's happening now? So my last day in court was March 16th. I was actually on the bench. And on March 17th, we were told courts are closed. But you really can't close the courts completely, right? You might close it to things that do not need to be heard right now, like non-essential filings. You're probably not having jury trials. You're probably not calling in jurors, right? But there are certain things that need to be heard. And those are getting to your question, those are the essential matters. So right now, as you know very well, as you were at my induction also, I was elected Manhattan Civil Court, but I'm currently sitting in Bronx Criminal Court. For however long I'm needed in the Bronx. And what we're doing in the Bronx and citywide and statewide are we're hearing arraignments. So arraignments are, for those who are not familiar, it's the first time an individual who's been arrested and has to go through our criminal justice system sees a judge. So those are things you can't really pause, right? If someone's arrested within 24 hours, they should see a judge so that their liberty interests are protected. So that's an essential function. If you're arrested, that should take place. So what's happening now is that it's done remotely. And that was a fantastic job that our court system did. It took a very personal, in-person type of setting where you have an arraignment, you have hundreds of people in the courtroom, you have lots of paper being passed back and forth, and it's a very touchy, touch-based system. Everyone's touching papers, we're seeing each other. You're moving that to a remote setting. So that takes a lot of work. So when I'm judging remotely, it's just like this. I'm on a computer, I'm seeing the parties, I'm seeing the attorneys, I'm seeing the defendants, and that continues to happen. So that's done as an essential matter.
Now, do you think that will continue after? Do you think that this is going to be, how long do you think this is going to exist like this, even once we're sort of off pause?
Right, I have to tell you, I think the virtual arraignments work out fine. They work great. How long would it take? I think it's until we're safe, that we know we can go back and be in that close quarters. It's very hard in our court system. I always call the family court and the criminal courts the trial courts. It's the people's courts, right? It's very hard to take a court system like that, where it's very busy and congested, to turn it into something where we social distance. So the remote part of it could be a while. It could be a while before our court system opens up completely, but that's done to make sure everyone is there safely, but without compromising anyone's liberty interest. So the arraignments might go on for a while, like that.
Let me ask you about another area, sort of that seems to be something that would be pressing and couldn't be put sort of like outside of the box of essentials, is domestic violence.
Yeah.
How is the courts handling that? How are the courts handling that?
Yeah, that's a good question. With what's happening now with the sheltering in place, and you can check whatever stats are available for this, but there's been an uptick in domestic
Mm-hmm.
violence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you think about it, the abuser in a domestic violence situation, the abuser and the abusee are sheltered together, right? Um, so what we're seeing now, the last arraignment shift I did, if I handled, say, the sum total of cases I handled were 100%, at least 60 to 70% of those cases were domestic violence cases, which is a lot. So if I handled 10 cases, 6 to 7 are domestic violence cases, and they come in because only a court can issue an order of protection. So that's why they come in. In another segment, we could talk about bail reform and what's happening recently with the changes of the law. But with the changes of the law and the bail reform, the police can let someone go right from the precinct. You arrest them, you let them go. They're put through the system if there's a need for certain things, one of them being an order of protection. So we get to see a lot of these cases. What's also important, and I would like everyone to know who's watching this segment, is that there's still help available for you through our court system. And this is not readily known, but it should be known. And I would like this show to be yet another vehicle for people to know this. One, if you're in a domestic violence situation and the police are called, then cases will come through a judge and the application will be made for an order of protection. Whether or not I grant it, well, that's up to the facts, right? But that's available to you. Another court that's open for essential businesses is our family courts. And that's something that my wife, who's a family court judge, will hear cases and preside. Litigants can still go to our court system and petition for an emergency order of protection. So they should not think because we're in a pandemic, the courts are closed and there's no recourse for us, I have to stay in this situation. There's still that vehicle for help. It might not be as familiar, but it's still available. If they go and contact their local courts, a petition can be drawn up and they can see the judge that same day. So with the uptick, there's also help through the court system.
Talk to me about housing court. There's a big, there's a state of evictions right now. What does that mean? And what does that mean when that ends? What does that look like for somebody who's facing eviction?
So when it comes to the essential filings, there's been a sort of pause on non-essential filings. When the governor issued his first executive order, putting a stop, a moratorium, a pause on evictions, that was 90 days, I believe, as of mid-March. So that would put us into mid-July or mid-June. Whether or not there's an extension of that, we have to see what the governor does with his executive order. What it means is that a landlord cannot initiate eviction proceedings in that time. That individual will not be able to file. So a tenant who is, say, falling behind in rent, and there's this whole movement about canceling rent. That's something that another branch of government is going to have to deal with. It won't make its way to the court system just yet. It might not be forgiven. It might not be totally wiped out. But at least that person who could be facing an eviction won't have to worry about it while the executive order is happening.
So that just means that it literally is on pause.
Yes, the eviction process. The interesting thing about our legal system is that we can modify it, but unless there's a formal change, the governor can issue these executive orders that puts a halt on things for a certain time period, but it doesn't abate it altogether. So if there's still a grounds for an eviction, that might work its way back to the courts when we start to accept non-essential filings.
And I looked on the court's website and it said that there's still legal help available by phone and on the web, and there's still a way to get an attorney that's through the website. I mean, there's definitely been a bridge in the gap between being able to go down to the courthouse,
right,
and not being able to, correct?
Right. Well, this is, there's all these silver linings, right, as to what's happening. Our court system, when I started practicing about 20 years ago, we didn't have, obviously, the technology we have today, and we were a very personal-based system where you have to, if you couldn't go down to the court building, you were out of luck, right? You might be able to call somebody. Now, everything is done remotely, and because of the pandemic, we were forced to adjust the way we do business. We being the courts, we being judges. So the help you can get is literally from the comfort of your home and the capacity to have it. A dynamic partnership that was born out of this pandemic was that our Chief Judge DeFiore and Governor Cuomo teamed up to start this initiative to have attorneys volunteer to help individuals, say in eviction proceedings, or tenants who could not afford an attorney, to help them handle this. So now this is a partnership between two branches of government to help individuals. So we sort of like shed away our pretensions and say, well, that's not my job, when we look at the very human aspect to say we need to help people. So the courts and the executive branch came together and say, there's a real need. Let's help folks. So they started this initiative. It's great. It's a wonderful partnership. Yeah.
Judge Shah Ally, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Victoria. Be well.